Hello and welcome to the Guardian Ashes Weekly to Adelaide then, as the series hangs in the balance, although not balance in the even sense of the word. Oh, look, the series is still alive. That is something to cling to. England have been splashing in the sea in Noosa. No major strife apart from Colin the Minder telling a Channel 7 cameraman to get out of my face. Colin showing so little sign of weakness that he's now batting at 3. Questions then. How do England approach this? Double down on Bazball or throw away years of preparation and dig in like Stokes and Jacks in Brisbane? And what do they do about the bowling? Hope that Geoff is still as fired up as he was when it was too late at the Gabba. Bring in Bashir, Josh Tongue. Australia will be visibly weakened by the reintroduction of Czech's notes 850 test wickets in Pat Cummins and Nathan Lyon. There's always hope, but realistically, how much hope? And while a win would change the momentum of the series, would heavy defeat change the whole direction of English cricket? I'm Max Rushden. Welcome to the Guardian Ashes Weekly. On the panel today, Guardian cricket correspondent Ali Martin. Hey, Ali.
Hello, Max. Welcome. Greetings from sunny Adelaide. Looking forward to heading to England training very shortly.
Guardian sports writer Taha Hashim. Taha, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Hello from my very cold London flat.
Perfect. Well, good to get the vibe. Good to get the sense of the vibe of what it's like back home. Guardian Australia's Geoff Lemon is here too. All right, Geoff?
Yes, about to head to the airport and get to Adelaide myself. But I think it is important to have the overnight English contribution because Taha's experience of the Ashes is the much more common one than the people who can travel out here sitting up all night.
Yeah, so let's start there, Taha. It's not been great in daylight hours. How's it been for you?
It's not been great fun, but it's kind of, you prepare 4 years for this. Yeah, England have been preparing 4 years for this. I've been preparing 4 years for this. So, you get used to the wake up calls.
Look, I think the biggest question, Ali, is how do England approach this game? Do they rip it up or do they double down? I mean, I can't bring myself to say Bazball with brains because I've just heard so many people say that. But what do they do? And what do you think they'll do?
Well, as someone who spent the night before my French A-level exam trying to learn the entire French vocabulary, I would say that a last-minute change of tack is not going to work. And I think they're going to plough ahead. In fact, we've already had sort of confirmation from Brendan McCullum that it's going to be the same top 7. So the batting remains unchanged. And I think the outlook is going to remain unchanged as well. They see Adelaide as a pretty good chance for themselves in terms of conditions. They see some pretty short square boundaries, which they are looking to target in their...
God.
I know. Even as I'm saying it. It's funny. So the ground dimensions it's about 23 metres slimmer than, say, the MCG and Perth Stadium.
Okay.
But the straight hits are much longer. So I think we know what's coming on that front. Yes, I can see a lot of people being caught log on, log off. But no, I mean, England will be pressing ahead. I think the big discussion that they will be having now is over the makeup of their bowling attack. I have a personal preference, which I don't think is on the table. I would like to see 5 bowlers. I would bring in Josh Tongue for Ollie Pope and ask everyone to move up 1 spot, which would give a battery of fast bowlers and possibly Will Jacks as the spin bowling all-rounder. But they're not going to do that. It's going to be 4 bowlers. And then the big question now is, do 2 years of investment in Shoaib Bashir get tossed aside for a bits and pieces all-rounder? Or do they sort of, really put that project that they've been working on for 2 years into this game, because essentially that is what it's been in preparation for. So big decisions ahead for England, but in terms of style, no going back at the moment.
Ali, the thing that jumped out at me from that press conference, the line was, you don't want to upset a settled batting order just because things might not have gone right recently. Could you describe England at the moment as a settled batting order, given the way that they've played? And why is it always, particularly the English way, that when the batting sucks, you sack some of the bowlers? Because that has been going on for the entire time that I've covered any matches involving this team. Oh, we've been bowled out for 80, time to drop some bowlers. It's remarkably consistent.
It is. In fact, I mean, part of me wonders whether it's almost kind of the New Zealand way. And actually, a lot of the way that this England team's been set up has been, obviously it's through McCullum, but I think it's influenced by his time with New Zealand, working with, a sort of a smaller pool of talent, having to cross formats. He's really tried to congeal a smaller group into the England setup and just give them as much rope as possible. Likewise, he's pared back the coaching team alongside it. So yeah, it is essentially, you're settled in terms of everyone knows that they've got that license, but ultimately at 2-0 down, you have to sort of say, well, this is this isn't working at the moment. But the flip side of that is, I mean, we've mentioned it on the pod before, is that the guy sitting in reserve, the next bat in is Jacob Bethel, a guy without a first-class century. And that is another sort of area of sort of England optimism over the last year or so, which is probably going to be exposed on this tour unless the incumbents can turn it around in this next match.
Taha?
I think the thing with the squad they have is like you could never really drastically reshape their batting lineup at any point in the series. You know, you only really have one reserve batter in Jacob Bethel, like you're saying, Ali. And I mean, you know, Will Jacks was also sort of there in as a reserve. But yeah, I mean, the only sort of rational move they could have made was having Bethel come in for Pope. But even when I say rational, obviously you're talking about a guy with no first class hundreds replacing a guy with 9 test hundreds. I think, you know, following on from Ali's point, it's a move that they wouldn't do, is that I would have, you know, Root at 3, Brook and Stokes move up the order, so they become 3, 4 and 5, Jack's going at 6, Smith at 7, and then you can add that other bowler to the lineup that they played in Brisbane. But obviously they're not going to do that, and it's also partly because I guess Root has always had that uncomfortable relationship with 3. Although I would remind him that the last time he batted at 3 was against Pakistan a year ago and he made a double 100. But yeah, you can also see the sense in them sticking with that top 7.
I guess they're settled in the senses they know when they're going in, and they know that, you know, if the openers are in, number 7 knows he needs to be padded up because of the cluster of wickets. You know, that it's settled in that sense, isn't it? You know, there's people, no one's running around getting their pads on late. They all know this. Can I ask you, Geoff? When Stokes batted like he did in Brisbane, and with Will Jacks, I thought Jacks batted really well as well, and then afterwards sort of came out a bit more reflective and a bit more like, this isn't good enough, you know, and I'm not here for weak men. And I think I was sort of carried along in this. Finally, I've seen something different, some fight. And then I think, like Sam Perry made this point on The Grade Cricketer, saying, but if you're one of the England players, if you are Ollie Pope, and you've been told for 4 years, this is how we bat, right? We attack. And if it's tough, we attack harder and we drive outside the off stump on the up and all this stuff. And then when the game's basically done, Stokes comes in and digs in and bats like Atherton and Russell in South Africa, and then comes out and says, look, you know, my team aren't weak, but it's sort of pointing the finger at someone. Do you think, well, hang on, you told me to bat like this for my whole life. Like, maybe I could have learned to be a bit different, but you told me what to do, and then you came in and you did something different. It's sort of gaslighting all of us.
It is. It's gaslighting. But he's been the gaslighter of Bazball for a long time, because over this whole duration, Stokes has been quite inclined to come in and play defensively, and this is something that, you know, you get narratives about a team, and you get stories that develop about a team from people who didn't really pay attention or don't really remember what went on. But there have been plenty of innings where Stokes has come in and played quite conservatively through that time. And there was a little burst where he was coming in and running down the wicket and trying to flat bat fast bowlers over cover early in an innings. But he did that a few times, and then he also very much didn't do it a bunch of other times. In a lot of ways, he's been the most conventional player in that top 6 through the supposed Bazball era, even more so than Joe Root, who has been more seduced by trying to change the way that he plays at times, and then has kind of forced himself to go back to his roots, as it were, in certain innings, but has still got sucked into that kind of momentum shift. So we have seen these defensive innings from Stokes, not quite as marked as it was in Brisbane, but he's been the most conservative batter in that top 6, I would say, over the entire duration of the experiment. So that's not new per se. The messaging bit might be confusing, but I'm sure he was able to clarify that with his players as to what's expected of them. But yeah, you can't expect them to suddenly change the approach. And I think I pointed this out in the podcast we did after that episode. Any thought that was the case went out the window as soon as Gus Atkinson walked in, who's already got a Test 100 to his name, and immediately slapped a ball straight to mid-wicket with a bouncer field in place. You know, there was no... The very next player in was not affected by the way that Ben Stokes had batted with Will Jacks. The next player in didn't say, okay, well, maybe it's time to dig in and try to put another 70 or 80 on the board and put some pressure on these guys. The next player went in and went, I reckon I'll try to hit 6s. That looks fun. And then slapped one straight to Steve Smith. So I don't think that this, personnel-wise, from what I've observed over the last few years, I don't see this England squad as being one that learns much or that is very interested in learning much. That would be my overall assessment. So I don't expect to see anything change.
But this might seem obvious, Ali, but wouldn't it be great to have a batting lineup where some of your players were incredibly attacking and some were a bit defensive, or they had like a natural game that and they looked at what was happening during the game. Like, I'm not a cricket coach, but these things, Ali, seem like good ideas to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're looking for is adaptability from 1 to 7. I think what you're trying to create is a set of players who can walk in any given situation and know how to read that situation, how to read the conditions, how to look at the broader match picture and what is required of them in that moment. And I guess, I mean, that is where England have fallen short. I mean, they've kind of held their hands up to it in terms of that situational awareness. That's ultimately what you want. I think your best players are your best players. I think the batsmen who hit the ball consistently in the middle of the bat and are able to manipulate fields to their will are the best players, regardless of whether they're attacking players or defensive players. So I don't necessarily see it as a case of looking for certain types of players to fit into a blended lineup, because all manner of situations get thrown up over the course of a test innings. You're just looking for adaptability, and that is sadly where England have fallen a bit short so far in what have been two very alien sets of conditions for them, I should add.
Yeah, and I wonder, Todd, after the game, like Stokes and McCullum didn't sound like they're on the same page. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it did seem like Stokes was furious and talked about mentality, and McCullum sort of came out in flip-flops and said, it'll be all right, that kind of thing. And I wonder, I don't know, maybe I'm creating something that isn't there. Maybe they really are singing from the same hymn sheet again. But I just wonder if there is a slight disconnect there.
I think that's probably just the case of Stokes is the man who's been on the field for 4 days. He's the one who's batted for one of the slowest half centuries of his career. He sort of gave everything, and so he was obviously a man speaking with a lot of emotion. He's the one who's going through it all. McCullum, at the end of the day, as much as he's taking a lot of heat, he's still removed. He's still just watching the game as a head coach. He's going to be a lot calmer when he talks post-match, and I think Stokes was just sort of talking. You can see a man who was sort of definitely talking in the moment. He looked as emotional as he's ever done as a captain. So I don't know whether you can really read into it and say that, these guys are like at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. I think it's just the case of, I think Stokes, you could see in the way that he was batting and, how, when he got out, just how distraught he was. Just wanted to give everything out there on that day. Somehow getting them back in the test match, pull off another sort of miracle as he's done in the past, and he just couldn't do it this time. And I think that's probably what that was more of. Yeah,
I mean, if you think about what kind of boost it might have given him had his lower order who came in after that effort been able to do something with it and try to build something on it. I don't know what you thought, Ali, in the press conference after that test. Ben Stokes sitting at that table in the champions room up at the Gabba was as flat body language wise as I've ever seen him. He was sitting at that table kind of hunched over and looking exhausted, not unsurprisingly, but usually he's got a bit of bounce and a bit of defiance to him even after a loss. That's been the way through this sequence where he's been able to more or less brush off a loss and say, we'll hit him twice as hard next time. And McCullum does seem to be still trying to run that line where we're super chilled out and relaxed about everything and everything's cool and we'll just go and win the next game. But Stokes looked flattened in a way that I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but it just felt different somehow.
No, he did. And actually, when he sort of spoke to the broadcasters talking about, this is no country for weak men and we don't have weak men in my dressing room, that was, as Taha says, straight off the field. And actually, he was quite late on parade, wasn't he, for the press conference? It took a long time for him to actually come up. And I think at that point, the adrenaline's gone, the emotion's gone, and that sort of left him. And then, he was a bit more considered, I'd say, in his answers there. But you could tell that there was a sort of general flatness there that you don't necessarily see with Stokes. And just on McCullum's comments, he sort of, I'm staying in the team hotel. You know, you're kind of crossing paths with these guys. And then we also had a McCullum press conference yesterday. And he was trying to sort of say that, well, he was sort of saying, you know, you guys fell into my trap. You know, you were, there I was talking about being over-prepared. You know, do you think I'm stupid? You know, I got you talking about what I said and about me. And if that protects my players, then I've done my job. And I think, okay, that's fine. And maybe I just wonder whether because he does think that they were over-prepared, overtrained, that they'd gone too hard in that training session. I wonder if he's just slightly retrofitting his motivations in that moment. Nevertheless, I mean, it was a talking point, and it was worthwhile exploring. And yeah, I equally, some of the messaging we analysed to the nth degree. It is still about what they do out there in the middle, and it is now a week to, you know, turn it around and put on a performance, because otherwise, I mean, I'm pretty sure I know how the story ends if they don't.
Just on the Stokes McCullum sort of divide and how they sort of looked after those test matches, you've got to remember that for McCullum, it's his first time coaching England in Australia. Stokes, on the other hand, has basically had 12 years of misery in that country, you know, from 2013-14 being part of a 5-0 whitewash, missed 2017-18, which, you know, probably hurts him more than, you know, being, you know, part of those other defeats. And then obviously the sort of shambles of that COVID tour. So you can sort of imagine that, you know, going through this again, how much that must kind of also factor into his mindset.
And the nerves of the spectre, you know, there's the spectre of the complete collapse that Ali's talking about, where, well, if you go down 3-0, it probably ends up 5-0. You know, there's something like the momentum in these series in Australia can be just irreversible at a certain point, and teams don't battle out that last game. They don't do an Andy Caddick at the SCG and win a consolation test at the end. They just get absolutely flattened, and that's been the case, you know, in 13, 14, 17, 18, 21, 22. You know, a couple of lucky draws really in terms of conditions were about as good as things got in those series. So I think there'd be that anxiety for Stokes as well, that, oh, bloody hell, we're not going to be one of these teams, are we? And just get absolutely taken apart.
All right, that'll do for part one. In part two, we will talk about England's bowling attack. We'll also talk about the Australian team. They're also in this series and doing quite well in it as well. It is worth saying that Australia has been rocked overnight by the anti-Semitic attack in Bondi. At the time of recording, has left 16 people dead, including one of the attackers. The country's worst mass shooting over 3 decades. I'm sure that both sides and the fans at the Adelaide Oval will pay their respects, and our hearts go out to the victims and the families, and we show solidarity to our Jewish listeners wherever you happen to be. We'll be back in a sec. Welcome to part two of the Guardian Ashes Weekly. Let's talk about England's bowlers then. Geoff, I'm clutching at straws here, as I sort of have to do and have been doing, I think, since, you know, day 2 at Perth. Do you reckon Jofra Archer might still be riled and be on it like he was against Steve Smith in that moment, even if arguably Steve Smith got the better of him in all those exchanges with the bat and with the mouth?
Arguably, yeah, creative use of arguably there. It was. I understand from a practical point of view what's going on with Archer in that sequence, because people are very quick to stick the boot into him, and there's I think there's often an unpleasant undercurrent, a stereotyping with Archer, where it's like, oh well, he's too laid back, he's too chilled out. And a lot of those descriptions are pretty coded, and people can figure that out when they hear it. But you can't come in your first over of a test match and go, I'm just going to bowl 155 kilometres an hour throughout. I'm just going to do 96 miles an hour for the whole test. It doesn't work that way, because he knows he's got to bowl spells, he's got to come back for repeat spells, he's got to be able to have a sustained approach over the course of what might be a long innings, and then coming back for a second innings. There is this curiosity where, what was it, the third day there, where he bowled 5 overs in the day, and the speeds were way down, and then there was coming back fresh in that evening session with not much to play for and bowling much faster than he had all tour. So maybe there's a balance somewhere in the middle where it's, give us one all-out spell at the beginning, and then we'll give you a couple of hours off, and then you can bowl within yourself after that. I don't know if there needs to be more planning about when he's going to hit the gas, but for whatever reason, he was able to hit the gas. So we've seen that he can do it, right? We've seen that he hasn't lost that capacity to bowl at that incredible pace. But if you're bowling that incredible pace and the ball's coming through at around the top of the helmet height, well, then it's not that hard for a modern player to get a tiny little nick on it, and it's going to sail over the keeper's head for six. And that's what you saw. Smith was able to use the pace, which even at Lords before he got hit in 2019, Smith was using the pace and hitting behind square a lot. Go back and watch that innings, and he's scoring quite heavily behind square because he's taking that short ball on and using that pace of it. So, if Archer could pull that pace on a length and get a little bit of seam movement in or away, well, yeah, different story. If Archer could bowl that length at the stumps and bring that Yorker into play, like, the one that won him a World Cup final into Martin Guptill's heel, then that might be an option as well, right? There are better ways to use the talent that he's got. So we really haven't seen the best of Archer. I don't think anyone has since that first test. He's currently a guy who's played a handful of tests. He's averaging over 30 and hasn't had defining spells after Headingley. So he had the sixer at the Oval in 2019 that helped win him a game there, and he took wickets at Headingley. But after that initial burst of 3 tests, I don't think we've seen... We've imagined we're going to get a lot more from Jofra Archer than we have seen in Test cricket, and he's got an opportunity to correct that, but he needs to adjust some things along the way.
I just wonder how much of a problem it is for Archer in that people want him to be this guy who will bowl those short, sharp spells of 90 miles per hour and knock over the openers really easily. But the problem with this attack is he's also the best control bowler England have. I think when they started this series, Archer, his economy rate was under 3. He was the only member of England's entire squad with economy rate under 3. I think Australia have multiple bowlers with low economy rates: Cummins, Lyon, Hazelwood. So I wonder just how much it's playing on his mind as well, that I could come out here and bowl 3 overs of pure heat, but then maybe knowing also at the back of his mind is like, I'm the best chance of scoring slowing the run rate down for the Aussies, because no one else in that attack is capable of holding up an end in the way that he is. He bowled quite poorly in that first innings with the new ball in that second test. That first over, there was a few balls down the leg side and he wasn't looking right, but he also wasn't going for any runs. And so I think that is quite a bit of a problem for him. And I think it's been a problem throughout his Test career in that you can never really pin him down. He's never been, even in that 2019 series that Geoff's talking about, at Lords in that second test when he, bounces Smith out, you're thinking, oh, this guy's sort of like an English Mitchell Johnson, he can come in and he can terrorise the team. And then the next test at Headingley, he starts, he's basically bowling like Vernon Philander. He's nipping it around and basically almost kind of slowing his own pace down. And so there's just been that constant, aside from the injuries that he's had, there's been this constant sort of battle of trying to pin down what kind of bowler Archer is. And then that leads to confusion of how he should be used, basically.
I was going to say, Ali, it adds the pressure onto Archer if the rest of the bowling attack are neither taking wickets or keeping the run rate down. That seems to be a problem.
Yeah, but it feeds into this attack, which, I guess everyone got so excited after that first day in Perth where they burst out the traps. They all sort of dovetailed each other superbly. But ultimately, what we've seen subsequently is an attack that has been sort of thrown together. And there are reasons for that, chiefly injury. In that, Atkinson did miss the entire summer up until the last test against the Oval, which was one that Archer at that point was sitting out. Stokes missed that game as well. And Josh Tongue played in that, but he's not played since. He may come into the reckoning here. And I think what we're seeing with this England attack is probably in terms of defined roles. They haven't had the time on the park together to get those defined roles, to know how to work with each other. And I think Archer being sort of at times not knowing his particular job, what do you want out of me in this situation, feeds into that. I do think, I mean, going back to my point earlier, I do think that you almost can't have enough seamers here, and that when Stokes is one of 4, that it puts a huge burden on him. If he's going to be bowling 25 overs in an innings, his role changes. But he's essentially the leader of the attack from fourth seamer. And I think that is a problem for England. And, you know, I don't know how you could have fixed it, because I think, as we've mentioned before, I think the time was right to tap Jimmy Anderson on the shoulder. Stuart Broad had retired. Chris Woakes may have come out here. My understanding is that he probably would have been on this tour had his shoulder not gone, but it was a kind of, in selection, it was probably 2 votes for and 1 against in the group of people deciding. But whether, aside from the pink ball game, whether he would have had a job to play on Australian pitches, I don't know. So my point being, this is a sort of, it's not a patchwork England attack, because these are all individually good bowlers. We have seen them at their best, and like the team as a whole, their ceiling is high, but their floor is very low. But it's more of a product of just not knowing each other or not playing enough test matches together.
And I think the big consideration with Stokes having that workload is that if Stokes is doing that job in Adelaide and the forecast is hot, we've got 38-degree days in the forecast, everything's in the 30s all week. If it ends up being, you know, if it's another Australian innings of 500, then maybe he doesn't make it to Boxing Day. Maybe he doesn't make it to Sydney, because you can break Stokes easily. You know, we've seen how his body can give way and how he's not willing to bowl within himself in terms of length of spells and that kind of thing. So there's that other point that England have built so much of their approach around the inspirational captain and his approach to the game. Well, if he bowls himself onto the sick list, then that leaves them, yeah, their most valuable asset, as it were, can be wasted in that way.
But that's, that's why when I saw people suggesting that he should move up to number 3, and I just thought, you know, what more do you want out of this guy? Like he is, you know, he's leading the attack from fourth seamer. He's leading the entire team, trying to set the tone. He's, you know, alongside Root, he's one of the 2 guys who's an adaptable player. To ask him to come in at 3, which, you know, 3 times in this series, that's involved walking out after, you know, the first over. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's crazy, and I just think that's why I'd be playing the extra seamer. And I do worry about the forecast here, which Geoff mentions is going to be particularly hot on some of these days. It feels like a massive toss, because I think it's looking at about 37 degrees on day 1. If England find themselves in the field that day, could be punishing.
But in terms of the Chris Woakes part to that puzzle that you mentioned, Ali, I think there was an element of playing the last campaign when preparing for this one, because Chris Woakes has had a bad overseas record, average 50, and everybody knew that. But I think he was a much better bowler, say, 6 months ago than he was 4 years and 6 months ago. I think he'd developed a lot even in that time. He'd put himself up as the attack leader at times, and if you go, well, okay, Chris Woakes wouldn't have been any use because he bowls slowish English style, medium pace stuff. Well, how'd Michael Neser go? He went okay.
It doesn't work in Test cricket, mate. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Keeper stood up. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work until the Australians are doing it, and it's working just fine. And because there's a lot more, I know I've said this every episode so far, there is a lot more in Australian pitches for the bowlers than there was a few years ago. You know, anybody who watched Alistair Cook make that abomination of a double hundred at the MCG on that absolutely horrific pitch in 2017, that's not what it's like anymore.
They should have told us about that. Yeah, they should have warned England about. We should have known.
There was no way to know. Can someone find that out by watching the cricket that happens every summer here?
Can we talk about Josh Tongue for a second? If he's going to come in, Taha, who does he come in for, and what type of bowler is he?
Well, I think the word, and it's turned cliche with Josh Tongue, is that he's a very slippery bowler. I'm not entirely sure exactly what that means, but if you can sort of imagine it in your mind, it's someone who's kind of arms everywhere, will pitch it up. It's sort of, he doesn't really know where it's going, but then again, the batter doesn't really know where it's going, and so that kind of works in his favour. He took a lot of wickets against India and kind of developed this reputation for sort of helping clean up the tail. I think that is primarily just from one Test match, from my memory. But, you know, when you've got that reputation and it's, you know, you can just watch him and see why he would be a trouble to, you know, in particular to the tail, because he's got that sort of Yorker that kind of angles in, and it's sort of like he's sort of doing a Bumrah impression. Obviously, he's not on that level as a bowler. And yeah, if you've got a reputation for knocking off tail end wickets, then I think that comes in particularly handy when England are going down under, when they've been haunted in the past by the image of Brad Haddin from 2013-14 of just consistently rescuing the Australians after sort of a top order collapse. I'd imagine, you'd think that, obviously Atkinson and Carter, the two vulnerable guys in that seam attack. You don't mess with Archer. I think he's got to be in there. So it comes between Atkinson and Cars. Tongue over Atkinson. I just think Atkinson. Yeah, it's basically that's. I think I'm just basically going with gut feel there, to be honest. But I mean, both have sort of struggled to put up a case.
He's had a disappointing
sort of undroppable.
He's not bowled well, Atkinson. That's easy enough to see, right? He's got as we talked about before the show, high ceilings in some of the houses of those of us recording. But we know what Atkinson's upper tier is, but he's come out here and looked like he's not quite sure how to do it in Australia.
Geoff, Bashir or Jax?
Look, I think the whole time that Shoaib Bashir's been playing, I've been mystified as to why he's playing, because he's the ultimate Bazball pick in a way. We talk about the batting and Jacob Bethel coming in because he had a couple of good T20s for the Bears or whatever it is, but Bashir's very much on that slate for me in terms of a guy who doesn't do it in county cricket, hasn't been effective at that sort of level, and yet is supposed to be effective at a level above. And to a certain extent, it's kind of worked. He did have a good year. He did take a stack of wickets. He took them expensively, and his economy rate's high. His bowling average is high, and he gets some people out. But I think that would be true enough of any spinner if you just bowled them for long enough. Like eventually, someone will hit something up in the air. I mean, he's better than that, but I've never been convinced that he's good enough to play Test cricket as a regular player, and it feels like England have been kind of stuck in that position in this series of having brought him, but think not having the confidence that he's actually going to go well. I mean, he has to play in Adelaide, otherwise the whole experiment's worthless. All of this build-up, all of these tests they put into him, they've got to give him the opportunity to play somewhere where it might be a longer game and there might be an opportunity for a spinner to come into play, but he's not Nathan Lyon. He's got to outbowl Nathan Lyon on a surface where Lyon's so experienced, and it's going to be a very tough week for him. But I think he has to play. Otherwise, it's a concession of defeat. It's a concession that they've got it wrong, and this England setup don't like admitting that they've got things wrong.
Just to go the other way slightly, is that I do think they were slightly unlucky in that the broken hand that he sustained against India, wiped him out of that series after the second test. And what's less unfortunate is the fact, I mean, it's just a fact of life that Somerset aren't massively interested. So when he was fit again back in September, he didn't get much bowling there. And on tour here, he has been bowling for the Lions with not much control. I've been watching him in the nets as well. And it's quite tricky to bowl in the nets to England because they are trying to launch you out the park. So to actually settle into a consistent line and length in the nets is hard to find your groove. But I would say, just watching them side by side at the moment, there isn't much difference between Jax and Bashir. But Jax, you'd get the extra batting and probably fielding as well. So I could see them going that way. But I'd certainly take Geoff's point about the overall 2-year investment, which would appear to have, come to very little were that to be the case.
Yes, and in the nets as well, Harry Brook can just say, that's another six. That's another six. You don't know. He might be caught every single ball.
Yes, I heard Zach Crawley shouting "no gully" the other day when he sort of sliced one. But anyway,
it would be great. Maybe we could bring that into games. Can we have that? Can that be an update to the playing conditions where once you've played a shot and it's in the air, you can then immediately decide where the field's going to be.
Right. If you get it enough time, you're right. Yeah. If Will Jacks could have said no first slip just before Steve Smith got down, then then he wouldn't have been out even if he'd caught it. We should talk about the Australian side, Geoff. Pat Cummins and Nathan Lyon return.
Handy ends.
So no, hang on. Here's me clutching at straws, Geoff, which is
sure.
of course, that improves Australia, right? It does.
It does,
but it's not like the other bowlers have let Australia down. Like Nisa was brilliant. Okay, Doggett's not been. He was made to do a job that he doesn't normally do, right? But it's not like they're coming into a side that has been bowling badly, is what I'm saying. So they can improve it, but they can't improve it hugely. Or is that just me really like just scrabbling on the floor for like an ounce of hope somewhere?
They can definitely improve it hugely, I think.
Damn it. No, I think I agree with you.
Look, one of the mystifying things about this series is that England lost so convincingly in Brisbane to a Sheffield Shield attack, and that's not to be disrespectful because there are some very, very good bowlers in the Sheffield Shield. But when you're England coming out to Australia thinking we're going to take on Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood, and you end up taking on Boland, Nisa, Doggett and getting absolutely pumped by them, that says a fair bit in terms of the depth of bowling strength. Doggett, as we've talked about, got asked to do a different job to what he does generally in first-class cricket and performed it serviceably enough. He'll probably play again. He may play again in the series. I don't know. If they were switching things around a bit, you think so. Cummins is unlikely to play Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney because you've got 3 tests in quick succession. He's coming off a back injury, so I'd be surprised if he plays all 3. They'd probably try to manage him out of one of them. Boland is an MCG specialist, so if I were in charge, I'd be going, well, you sit Boland out of Adelaide, you let Nisa play in Adelaide because he's bowled so well in Brisbane, give Boland this test off, bring Boland back for Boxing Day, and potentially Cummins misses Melbourne. Maybe the series is decided by then, and then he plays in Sydney, something like that. But at the moment, you've just got such consistency of quality in the reserve ranks that it almost doesn't matter who misses out.
It is interesting because there's been so much talk. I mean, God, so much talk about England's preparation here, but Pat Cummins is coming in to play his first game of cricket since a Test match in July, and there has to be a limit as to what you can. I mean, he's an elite bowler. Don't get me wrong, and I suspect that his training method and his program will see him pretty cherry ripe when he gets out there. I suppose if you're just looking at it from an English point of view, is whether they can take Pat Cummins deep into the game, if you see what I mean. So I'm talking about days 3 and 4 and potentially even 5, where your test comeback, having not played since July, you could start to feel it there. Likewise, Nathan Lyon, who's been on the sort of periphery for a while himself here, having missed out in two pink ball tests out of the last 3 and been a bystander in Perth. Sometimes his 4th innings record can get kind of queried as well. I've just been looking at the numbers. It seems pretty decent. I guess some different, there are other spinners with sort of higher strike rates in that 4th innings. So if England were to find themselves bowling first and chasing in the game, I suppose that's one area that could be opened up, particularly, Cam Green as well, who is the kind of relief bowler here. His workloads aren't massive and he can't bowl to the bumper plan that he used to be able to deliver as well. So, yeah, it's you're talking about 2 elite bowlers that come in, but there are aspects that potentially could play out over the course of 5 days that where actually Australia could find themselves a bit short at times.
Now, unlike England, who have this very settled batting lineup, Australia have to deal with what they do with Usman Khawaja, who said he wants to play and he's there and he's going to be part of the team. Does it make any difference? Like what would you do?
This is me talking from the perspective of wanting a good story. I'd love to see Khawaja come back into the side and sort of kind of just hang in there and get to the SCG and potentially have a kind of the farewell that his sort of career deserves. I think it's been and sign off for the SCG where it began for him 14 years ago. I think it's been a particularly stirring tale over the last few years when he came back in the last Ashes and came back in the middle order, which, maybe where he kind of ends up being this week in Adelaide, and made those twin hundreds and then sort of, just was basically the best opener in the world for a bit, leading through to that 2023 Ashes. Ultimately, though, I think from an English perspective, they'd be probably pretty happy to see him back in there. But it's been obvious for a while that he's been struggling and is pretty much coming towards the end. And I think if you look at what you'd be replacing, obviously Josh Inglis didn't really get the score to put any real pressure on Khawaja's place in that middle order, because obviously he'll be the man who drops out. Obviously won't be Travis Head. But then you also look at what you are potentially losing in the field. It might be a small thing, but that, Inglis's run out changes that game. If Stokes keeps batting in that first innings and in Brisbane, then who knows where that game goes.
In terms of story, right? Okay, if England win, here's hoping. It does, the series is alive, and that is great. And I think that's, I'm not saying what neutrals might want. Obviously, Australians would love to win this 5-0. If England don't win, Ali, if it's another bad defeat, I think you WhatsApped me and said you think this could be like a sort of pivotal moment in English cricket. Do you think, is that what you think will happen?
Do you want me to preview my post-mortem?
I'd like you to preview your post-mortem. Yeah, and that's how we'll end this one. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is a particularly huge game. Actually, I think it could be an inflection point, because I think there has been they've made a series of decisions, not just on this tour, but over the last sort of year and a half, 2 years that they've been building up to this. And some decisions at the time you could see the logic behind, and they still haven't played out. And then you can look at some where you're thinking, well, actually, this really has backfired here. And I guess that will go back to, head coach and director of cricket. And that is probably, that is the history of English cricket. It does show you that the jobs tend to change after heavy series defeat in Australia. And but I guess my point about sort of English cricket more broadly is that there has been a sort of wave of momentum behind this approach to the game in terms of this, particularly acutely attacking, aggressive game. And were that to be sort of taken out of those two roles that I talked about, director of cricket and head coach, I then wonder what the knock-on effect would be thereafter. After you've had a thin pope, you get a fat one, etc. But I do actually think that English cricket needs to sort of break that cycle to a degree. I don't think you can have these huge philosophical lurches one way or the other. I think you have to look at what has been the best of the last 3 years and try and keep as much of that as you can. But I think if jobs change hands, then you're probably looking at people who are maybe going to be a little bit hotter on the details at times. That would be my way of looking at it. But look, it is only 2-0. I think if England can win a live test here and bring it back to 2-1, I think that does flip the narrative completely. And I do think it's possible on this ground in particular. So looking forward to this week.
Do you think it's possible, Geoff, finally?
I don't think it's going to happen.
Oh no, always the same.
Yeah, I've watched. In a way, like you all like to claim that you're traumatized from watching England. In a way, I'm traumatized from watching England in Australia, because I've sat through some very, very boring series watching these visits down here. I would say if England win this one, Australia won't care about that. If England win this one, it's like Mitchell Johnson in 2010 ripping them up at Perth. It didn't make any difference to the overall direction of the series. Really, the quality of that England side told in the end. And I would think if Australia lose this, they go, okay, cool, we're going to win 4-1 instead of 5-0, whatevs. Whereas if England lose this, they're on a massive trajectory to complete annihilation. But I want them to win it. I want England to win this game because it will be much more interesting for the series, and it'll give us a live Boxing Day test. So I'm barracking with everybody else who listens to this show who has a different accent to me.
All right, complete annihilation. That's sort of a sad thing to think about in 5 days' time, but there we go. Now, obviously, lots of cricket podcasts around. Our main rivals are, of course, these two 10-year-olds who got in touch. They've got in touch again at the Short Legs. To Max, Geoff, and the team, thank you for the shout out. This is Gary. I can say we're delighted to hear the Short Legs mentioned on your pod. Check your spike in listens because we've given you a shout out back. We might be coming for your jobs, but only one ball at a time for now. And as we've learned through the first two tests, there's no need to rush when it comes to Test cricket. Ho hum, England. Bing writes, we're also wondering what advice you have for aspiring young podcasters. Assuming your dads are also the producers of your pod, how have you managed to get them to record the sound so well? Gary's dad needs all the tips he can get. Gary and Bing, the Short Legs. That is Willie Rushden, you can hear in the background. 10-month-old, an Australian son. May he get an Australian accent and open the batting for England. Anyway, we're not giving you our secrets. You've got to work it out for yourselves. But thanks for getting in touch again, and that'll do for today. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Taha. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Ali.
Cheers, Max. Speak to you soon, mate.
Thank you, Geoff.
See you after Adelaide, and then we don't have to do any more prognosticating. We will know.
We will. The post-mortem will happen soon. Ashes.weekly at theguardian.com. You can find us on YouTube, follow The Guardian Sport on Instagram and TikTok. This pod is produced by Nick Harmon. Our executive producer is Daniel Simo. The theme tune is by Rudy Zagadlo, and we will be back after the third test.